Well, hello out there. This is Nancy Cogar, and of course, this is Boomer Time, and I'm so glad that you're here today. We are going to be talking about how valuable good, understandable information is. You know, that kind of information can be hard to find. And sometimes when you find what appears to be good information, you can't understand it. So how valuable is that? Here on Boomer Time, I like to talk about being prepared when you're aging, and so many of us are not. So that's part of the reason I created this podcast, as you know. And it's also meant to be a resource to those of you out there who are finding yourself in that new role as caregiver of an older adult. So I am glad you're here. And as I said, my producer, Nate Paris, and I did some research before the show and tried to find some questions that I thought would be beneficial to you. Just kind of taking a look at them from a Tennessee standpoint, of course, and want to hear what you have to say. And I think these will probably be representative of how a lot of people out there feel. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but I wanted to remind you, of course, we're on video. You can see me. And we're excited about that here. Go ahead and please share the podcast with a friend. That will really make a difference. And I will thank you over and over again. Also, you can go to my website, nancycogar.com, and you can register for all kinds of good resources, including elder law news you can use. That's my monthly newsletter that contains all kinds of handpicked articles that are relevant to you. And they're the kinds of things you don't see necessarily on the general news or on the internet. So I think these are very valuable. Remember, you can still hear us on Spotify, and we are on YouTube, as I mentioned. So I am really excited about where we're going and that you're going there with us. This is supposed to be a community to help you as we age. And I've told you about that Silver Tsunami before. More of us are turning over 65, and it's going to put great pressure on the system. So I hope that the resources and the information that I share here makes a difference in your lives. And I also hope that you find this encouraging. So with that, we are going to talk about having more understandable information for you. And we are going to talk about resources because, of course, the issues involving aging can be wide-ranging, of course, and they can be very, very complex. The people that come into my office here have, all kinds of circumstances. Everybody's circumstances are different, to an extent. They may have similar issues, but maybe their family's different. Maybe their resources are not as great. So everyone needs a personalized plan and needs personalized counsel. That's why I want to talk about these questions today. So we're going to do that, and I hope you enjoy them. And I also hope that you'll reach out. Let me know what you think. I do want to know what you think. And I would love to know if you have questions. Share those with me, and we may share them right here on the podcast.
Hey, Nancy.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a Reddit account?
No, I don't.
Are you
But
familiar
I should, huh?
Are you familiar with Reddit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I was just curious.
I'll search it and then see it. But
all right. Well, I've been a Redditor for probably over 10 years. But what I love about the platform is that it's just open and it is anonymous. So people feel more comfortable. In a day and age of social media, people feel a little bit more comfortable on Reddit to be able to share maybe some very personal things on there. And there's a lot that I found under the estate planning Reddit channel, and or the sub, rather, as we like to call it. And I found it interesting that, that there's a community out here on this very topic. It just means that people are hungry for this information.
Absolutely.
And I just think that we're doing a service by just, really tuning in to all of the questions around this topic and wherever they're coming from, and really trying to answer them in the context of Tennessee law.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just think this is a very important area that shouldn't be neglected. I mean, maybe, there are other lawyers out there that are looking for to be better at what they're doing. I would not sleep on Reddit, just being just frank,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever profession you're in, I would not sleep on Reddit in terms of reading up on what the status quo is and how people are actually feeling, because like I said, it's an anonymous platform. So, quite a few people feel like, okay, I can turn here to, talk about some very sensitive things, without it being attached to necessarily me. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just something that I think we take advantage of, especially when we're looking at next gen information and social media and conversations on the net.
Well, I think that's a good point, Nay, because, this kind of stuff can be really scary. You're talking about life and death circumstances. You're talking about life savings. You're talking about health. You're talking about caring for your loved ones. And that's not easy stuff.
No, it's not. But here's the caveat of using, say, social platforms or internet platforms, is that, you really don't want to. It's crazy because it's like a bittersweet situation. You want to be able to voice your opinion or your concern or ask your question anonymously, but then at the same time, you don't really want to be getting information off of some sketchy site off the internet.
No.
So, at least
And you don't want to put information out there that could be taken advantage of.
right, exactly. Because some people do get a little bit personal. And so, in curating these questions off of Reddit, I've tried to eliminate a lot of those that have very sensitive information and just
Mm-hmm.
focus on general questions and things like that. But what I love about Reddit is that the moderators tend to be, cognizant of, okay, this person is posting information that's too personal. We really don't want this to be out there. Shout out to those at Our Estate Planning on Reddit. Really good resource in case you want to see some questions maybe pertaining to your state. Again, Nancy and I are going to go over questions related to things applicable to Tennessee law,
Mm-hmm.
but there's questions from, all over the globe on estate planning here. So I highly recommend, if this is something that you're curious about, you want more information, just go read the questions that are there, because that's just going to be really helpful as to formulating your own questions. Maybe somebody on the platform has asked something that you wish you could have asked,
Mm-hmm.
or you didn't know that you should ask. So very, very valuable resource. I'll just say that. So, Nancy, I will ask you a couple questions. Yeah.
And you keep sharing all this wonderful information with
Huh?
me about how to reach people and where people are hanging out these days on the internet.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so I appreciate that.
Endless places. I remember I was teaching a summer camp, and a young lady, was telling me about the social platforms that they're using today. And she mentioned one called Pocket. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, oh, you don't know? And I'm like, well, I guess she had the attitude of like, aren't you the teacher? Like, you should know this. And I'm like, well, I'm a little old. I've slept since the last time a social media platform was released, so I don't know. So it was fascinating, but I just love to just open up and just see like, okay, where are people having conversations? But then that's also opportunity for you, Nancy, to really dive in and see, how you can be of help,
Yeah.
to those that really need assistance.
Well, and that's the whole point of this podcast. If you're just started watching, we want to be helpful as you look at how you're going to be prepared as you age, or if you're helping an older adult, possibly a parent. This more and more people are finding themselves in these circumstances, and it is very difficult, and it can be complex. So I want to make sure to get that information out there to all of you, so you can do the right planning and find someone. It might be me, might be someone else, but you find the right person to do planning with.
All right. So are you ready to get into these questions?
Yes, ma'am. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So,
all right. So this one here is titled, What Happens If the Executor Dies After a State Has Been Finalized in Tennessee? It reads, My spouse inherited a house and money after the only parent died. The items were divided according to the will, and it was finalized and closed probably 9 months ago. My spouse has yet to change the checking account over to their own name. it's still listed as an estate account in their parents' name. My question is, since they don't have a will, is it possible that the sibling could make a claim on the money and house, or would it all automatically go to me, the spouse? They seem
Hmm.
to think it would just go to me. We don't have any kids. My spouse is not in good health. They have always said that I would be taken care of once they pass, but them not handling anything makes me believe otherwise. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a couple of really good issues in there. First, related to the executor. So, an executor is appointed when you establish a probate estate, and that's where you tender a will over to the court and to begin administration in accordance with that individual, deceased individual's will. Or if they didn't have a will, you can also have an administration of an estate with not really an executor, but it's called an administrator or personal representative, and that follows state law. So it sounds like that individual's kind of talking about some of those issues, but I want to address them in turn. So the first issue that they raised was, what happens if you establish an estate and the executor dies? Ouch. Well, they're people, that can happen. So typically, when I work on a will with someone, I always encourage them to have a number two, an alternate, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So your executor may die before you. And so if you have an alternate, that person is ready to stand in. And that is exactly what I think would happen in that circumstance. So the court would probably have to appoint the alternate as an executor. The other issue may be, is that person eligible or qualified to serve? And that can be an issue too, because the state law has some requirements about who these people are and what their background needs to be. So that can be an issue. One other thing I wanted to mention about that is, there have been circumstances, say it's an older person and they didn't have an alternate in their will. Well, sometimes the court can appoint what's known as a public administrator. That is an individual, an attorney, that is appointed by the court to oversee these cases that don't have anyone to otherwise administer them. And they just take a hold of those and make sure that what the person who had initially died, the decedent in the will, what they had wanted is fulfilled, and that the creditors are paid, and that the estate is administered correctly. So that's an option too, but it really just kind of depends on the circumstances. If there isn't an alternate, sometimes the beneficiaries can petition the court. That's something else that I have in my will. And if they agree, they can appoint someone if the initial executor had passed away. So I think that covers that first issue. The second issue was a little bit more complex. So they were talking about, I think, being a beneficiary of the person that passed away. Honestly, if the person that passed away was a beneficiary, say that person was the sole beneficiary of the individual's will. All right. So we said there was a will, and there's a difference between having a will and not having a will. So I'm talking about if there is a will and this deceased individual was the sole beneficiary. So if they die, the will has to specify how that inheritance would pass. There's a difference here because this person survived the will maker. So really, their estate now is the beneficiary of that interest. And we see those kinds of things, estates on top of estates, sometimes on top of estates. So that can be pretty complicated. It really kind of depends on what that person had in their estate. If they didn't have a will, it may be that it falls back on state law as far as who gets what. But you're going to need a court to determine that for you. So it's not as easy as saying, do I get everything, in my opinion.
Okay, and the next question is asking about a simple will in Tennessee. It's a 50-year-old male with 2 adult children. He says, I want to prepare and execute a very simple will that states that each of my children receive 50% when I die.
Mm-hmm.
Total estate is currently about $300K, including home equity. Where and how can I do this for free?
For free? Well, you can call Legal Aid. Legal Aid has different offices in Chattanooga, Knoxville, different parts of the state. So if you do not have the income available to make a will, they can help you out. But if you've got $300,000, I don't think you're going to qualify for legal aid. And I really, I know you want to be frugal, but you get what you pay for, in my opinion. So you might want to rethink that strategy. You don't want to print something off the internet and just wing it, because in Tennessee, Tennessee is a strict formality state, which means if the document, the will, does not look like what the law requires it to look like, it may not be enforceable. So it could have been free, but if it's no good, you're going to have trouble either way. So I think, more importantly, you should reach out to an estate planning attorney like me or someone else in your area and ask some simple questions. Tell them what you want. I get calls like this all the time. Tell them what you want. Ask them how much it'll be. And listen to them, because they're probably going to tell you that you need more than just a will. And there's a reason for that. I don't know, you might want to reconsider the free aspect.
Right. All right. Here's another one. Great aunt passed with no will. I live in the state of Tennessee, and my great aunt passed earlier this year. She lived with me and my father, and we assisted her with her care. She did not have a will when she passed away. She did have a bank account with funds, which my father is a joint owner on.
Okay.
When she passed, all of her funds were moved over to my father's. The only thing she owned was a vehicle worth $6,000. She owned no home or had no other possessions. She received Social Security and had no credit cards or other bills that we know of. No life insurance policy or to their knowledge. As far as family, she had no children or spouse, and only surviving relatives are nephews and nieces. What's the best course of action to handle her estate? And then the Redditor refers to the Small Estates Act. That's supposed to be less complicated than normal probate. And she asks if this is worth doing.
Wow, well, they did some research there, I can tell. So how an asset is titled, first of all, may make the difference as far as whether it's included in someone's estate or not. So the joint bank account that you mentioned, when great aunt died, here in Tennessee, it would vest in the co-owner, the father. So that would not be an asset of great aunt's estate. That becomes father's property. That's the way the law works here. Sometimes people do that unintentionally or for convenience sake, and it requires some undoing. But don't put one child on your bank account, and if you've got 3 others, that's all I'm going to say. We'll save that for another day. But the second part of that question, I think they asked about a vehicle. Vehicles do not need to be probated in the state of Tennessee. There is a form that you can find. It's a state government form, and it's called an affidavit of inheritance. So if you can find that form and you can get all the people that would inherit that vehicle based on their descendancy or who's directly related to the great aunt, then you can have that vehicle pass just with that document. So that can be simpler. Same issue, though, if you put it in a small estate, you're going to need to figure out who has the legal right to that interest. And sometimes that can be complicated, especially when you've got older people and they didn't have a will, and maybe they didn't have children. So You probably might need to sit down with someone to try to figure that out.
Okay, I have a really good one. This is a very
Okay.
popular question, actually. A question that I had when, we were handling my family's affairs as well. So, a credit card company is calling about dad's debt.
Mm.
Hello, I am the executrix for my deceased dad's estate in Tennessee. I have done everything my lawyer has told me to do, including mail out the notice to creditors that was placed in the newspaper to all known creditors, which were mostly medical bills, but he did have one credit card that had a small balance.
Hmm.
We were about halfway through the notice to the creditor waiting period, which is 4 months in Tennessee,
Hmm.
and the creditor calls today in an attempt to collect money on the dad's credit card debt. They did the whole speech about how I'm not liable for the debt personally and so on. I don't understand why they are talking to me instead of filing a claim with the estate. They told me they are sending me a letter to forward to my attorney. What in the world for? Is this something credit card companies do in probate cases?
Yes. Well, number one, they want to be paid. As you noted, they're unsecured, and it may be a liability of your father's estate, but it's not a personal liability for you or your family members. That's important to know. You raise a good point because you're right. After you give that notice, there's a 4-month window in which creditors are allowed to file claims, and you're allowed to object to those claims. So if they have not filed a claim, you're precisely right. You should instruct them to file a claim. They know better than that. They're just trying to shortcut. Can't blame them for trying, but there's a process, and you are absolutely correct. If you know the debt is due, then as the fiduciary of the estate, you should pay it. But it's supposed to come in through a claim. You can pay things that you know are due, but you're correct in saying that there's a process basically. So you got them.
I thought that was a really good question. But
Yeah.
here is one that I feel like is neutral to regardless of what state you're in.
Okay.
You can just answer in the context of Tennessee law. But the question is, can the executor change the will? It says, my father has 2 children from my previous marriage. He has since passed away, and my mom got everything because most of the assets were in her name. My mother made a will naming her cousin as the executor of the estate. My mother's cousin said that she is going to ignore my mother's will and give my father's 2 children everything, and I get nothing. I might like to add that I am my mother's only child. Can she legally do it?
Well, she's named as the executor. Well, she has an affirmative duty to tender that will to the court of where the county where mom died. And I will also say that if you intentionally hide or destroy a will, that is a Class E felony. That brings jail time. So you don't want to be messing around with that kind of stuff. And I can tell you that if she won't establish the probate, then daughter, you can go and establish the probate. You can file it as an intestate probate and then require or ask the court to require that the will be turned over. Most likely in that kind of circumstance, you're going to need a lawyer because there's a lot of procedural steps that are usually unfamiliar to a lot of people. But you have rights. You have rights. And no, you cannot change a person's will after they pass away. You can't change it beforehand, and you definitely can't change it afterwards. And I would say that that's treading on some dangerous territory. Good question.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good question.
Sometimes people ask me if they need to file a probate if there's just real estate involved. Not necessarily. I will say that, given the amount of fraud, unfortunately, that we have going on, that title companies sometimes, if you're planning to sell the property, want an order of the court. So that can be a beneficial thing. Also in the state of Tennessee, there is a limited probate for the purpose of real estate and personal property. It's known as muniment of title for real estate. So what you essentially do with that is file a petition with the court and attach the will. And that's it. You get a certified copy of that, and you don't have to do anything else. So that's helpful in some circumstances.
I think this one's going to be our last question.
Okay.
But I thought this was good too. And this is stressing the importance of planning, as you always insist on our viewers and listeners, that it's a very important thing to do is to plan ahead. So it reads, how can my parents protect their house from probate? My parents didn't plan ahead, plain and simple. My dad now needs help caring for my mom and didn't have the foresight to put their house in a trust. In the state of Tennessee, probate is mandatory and Medicare will sell the house to recoup long-term care costs that were covered. Is there any way to help them protect their home and assets?
Yeah, that's a hard question. And I've dealt with that before with clients. I would ask a couple questions in response to that. Are your parents competent? Are they still able to make a plan? If they are, then you may have some options. If they're not, have they made a power of attorney? That power of attorney may allow you to do some things related to the house. So that's an option too. In the kind of the more serious option, you can file a conservatorship and gain control of their finances if they're not able to do that on their own. And as conservator, you may have some opportunity to help them in some of those things. But that's unfortunate. That's one of the reasons I say plan, because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to plan. And you talk about Medicaid, and I'm assuming based on that question that they receive TennCare benefits. So if they do receive TennCare benefits, the house is considered an exempt asset for purposes of eligibility, but it most certainly is something that the state will recover against if and when both parents are deceased. So they won't do it when one is deceased because they don't want to make that person, the survivor, homeless, but they will upon the second. And, TennCare has the ability to create a probate on its own, to pull the property into probate, to move for it to be sold. So you're talking about a real complex issue. There may be some things you can do. I would leave it at, it depends on the competency level of your parents, and also would depend on the titling of the real estate. I'm assuming it's probably in both parents' names, but I would want to look at some of those things to see what's possible and what isn't. So hope that helps. Yeah, I've enjoyed today, and I hope you have too. I always like to hear what people are thinking and the questions that they have. Maybe you've got a question. Maybe you've got an issue. Send it along to me. I would love to use your questions on a future Boomer Time. This has been fun for me and interesting. So I really hope that some of the answers that I provided gave you some insight, maybe on some of the things that you're dealing with. But remember that there is nothing like having an expert or a professional to help you with these things. As I said at the beginning, these are complex issues, and sometimes they're multi-layered. So you want to get the best help possible. Don't do it like the guy who said he wanted a free will and he had $300,000. That's worth spending the money on. There's a lot of other things you can avoid. Don't go to McDonald's as much, but get your will done and pay for it by someone who knows what they're doing. So anyway, I really enjoyed today, and I hope you have too. And I just wanted to remind you again to check out my website, nancycogar.com. Lots of resources there, and you can subscribe to be a member of Elder Law News You Can Use. That's a free monthly resource for you. And please share this podcast with a friend. That really helps in growing our community. And that is really important to me, as you know. So I've really enjoyed our time together today, and hope you have too. And I'll see you next time here on Boomer Time.